welcome to episode 1 of the Content Collective podcast. We started this basically with the intention of having something that's a little bit easier than the other content we're producing. Something that me and Christo can kind of just sit down and have a chat and do without loads of preparation or too much work, as is the case with most of the other stuff we're doing. So we're going to be talking, we will still have guests on it. We'll still talk about all the same things we do in the Derailed series on our YouTube account. But this one's just going to be audio, and most of the time it will just be me and Christo talking about whatever is going on, something we find interesting in the sport, something we find interesting in the outdoor kind of space generally. We plan on having guests on it as well, but the default will be myself and Christo talking about interesting things, or things we think are interesting in outdoor sports generally, and obviously mountain biking quite a lot. So that's what it's going to be. Thank you for tuning in so far. This week and in this episode, we're going to talk about confidence on the mountain bike. So I'll start by talking a little bit about my own sort of journey with confidence in mountain biking, and how it's kind of changed over the years, and what some of my strategies were, and then you even though you can get confidence, this is true of broader things in life as well. Confidence is something you have to kind of work to get, and then it's always quite possible to lose, and then you kind of have to start that process off of gaining it again. I suppose one important thing to say is, confidence on the mountain bike is a very good thing. You generally will ride better. It's one of the most important things when it comes down to racing, but also just general riding. When you're not too worried about crashing, you ride better, you're less likely to crash, and mountain biking is a lot more fun. What do you think, Christo?
You set me up for a one-word answer there, because I concur. I think
all right, that's enough from Christo.
That's the end of the podcast. See you later, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. No, I mean, like, confidence is it's kind of everything in mountain biking. It's kind of everything in everything that you're doing. I mean, it's how you access the sort of flow state. It's when you're in full confidence, I guess. And also it reduces the sort of risk of injury, because like it's almost always when you hesitate that you crash. So like, it's a lot easier said than done, gaining confidence, but it is, when you have it, it's something that you sort of strive to keep.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, having it, that is, as you say, it does have quite a strong relationship with that state of flow, just being fully engaged in what you're doing. And when you're confident doing anything, you're just fully immersed in what you're doing. And that kind of is what we're talking about, is how do we get to that place where you're fully immersed in riding and not worrying about anything else. So my own kind of journey with confidence, I think when I started mountain biking, when I first started, I probably was fairly confident. I used to always be looking to kind of push things and do jumps and whatnot, even when I first started riding, or even before in the sports I did before that. And then when I first started racing mountain bikes, I remember, it was the confidence. I'd definitely lacked confidence, and races were very scary places to be, which made it really difficult to race. And I had some good reason as well to be fearful, because my first year or two of racing, I probably left in an ambulance every other race. And then, it started to shift when I probably was riding a little bit more around, I would say around 16. I tell this story sometimes as well of, there was this gap. So me and you both used to ride up Christopher Hill a lot in Edinburgh. And there was sort of path gap that someone had made, and this was before I think I was racing. So this is kind of where I was confidence wise before I found it on the bike. And so I was looking to do this gap but it was probably one of the larger step downs I'd ever done. And I was doing loads of run-ins, and I was very scared to do it. And then I sort of half did it on the time that I actually rolled past the takeoff of this thing. But I pressed the brakes just before, so I kind of pedaled in and then had this moment of hesitation, moment of fear and doubt just before going off the lip, and pressed the brakes. And then, I mean, it was the worst thing I could have possibly done. This was a step down of around, what would you say, around 8 feet.
It was big enough to really hurt you, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I pressed the brakes, and Cammy, just so happened, our friend, was just was standing right below the takeoff. So I rolled onto his head, and then I like rolled over the front and just like, sort of somersaulted and just made it onto the steep part of the landing, and I didn't hit my head or my neck off the knuckle of the path, which would have been really awful. And it's because, I half committed to that gap. And so that was something I would do, some like common things I would do at that age was take loads of run-ins and sort of half do things when I did. And so at a certain point, and it's so important in downhill racing that you can just do things, that are scary, because especially when you start, like everything was scary. You get to even, just domestic races had things on them that would be very scary. The World Cup certainly had lots of features that, you had to just get over and do quite quickly. So because of that, because of the racing that we were doing, we, in practicing, developed this kind of strategy of like just doing things first, like no run-ins, just send the gaps. And soon I kind of shifted some my identity almost to the place where it was like important that I could just do things that scared me immediately without thinking too much about them, which was actually a very good thing in terms of my progression in the sport, although it did lead to a lot of I don't know if it actually did lead to a lot of injuries, but it was a very good thing. It brought on my riding loads, and it meant like whenever there was these features, it was, because we were just used to that, you could just go and do them. So we used to have this rule, me and you, when we would go training for downhill, we'd just do the scariest thing we could as the first thing we did that day. And then it freed us up and gave us that confidence so that we were riding corners better. We were just riding everything better. The rest of the day, we were kind of looser, which is also, sort of perversely safer as well. It's kind of counterintuitive at that level. But you would usually do something kind of big and scary at the start, and then you're just confident. You don't believe you're going to hurt yourself. There's obviously a limit to that. Sometimes you can be overconfident, but as a general rule, just doing something a little bit outside your comfort zone, maybe warm up a little bit, but that certainly worked for us. Do you think?
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I was just listening intently. I think. It was quite an interesting sort of strategy that we took at the time, and it was maybe a bit too liberally applied at the time. That it just sort of became a battle of who could do the stupidest thing. But like once we sort of go past that, it was just a tool that sort of allowed us to just improve our riding and just sort of, it was just a decision that we'd made. And then once the decision's made, it kind of takes half the stress out of hitting that scary feature. Like you've decided that's what you're going to do.
That was exactly the thing. Yeah, it was a decision, and you make that decision like, okay, maybe I'm going to hurt myself, but I'm just going to do it. And that avoids that, what I did, when I was younger, of pressing the brakes on the takeoff, which is the worst thing you can do, is half do something that's scary. So you make the decision beforehand, and then you just come in and you do the thing. I think, that definitely did. I suppose I'll carry on just with my own kind of journey, because that became just something that was I held kind of quite closely in terms of my writing, was the ability to do scary things. And, even when others maybe weren't willing to. And then, so I had a period, even when I stopped racing and I was still riding a lot, I had a period of about 5 years without injury, doing lots of, with that mentality of just like doing scary things a lot, and being the first person to do a thing and doing things just for the sake of them being sketchy and dangerous. And then I left for the US, didn't really ride for a year, and came back. And then I thought I could still do riding in that same way. But I hurt myself. I had a big sort of crash down this track. It wasn't actually on a jump or anything, but it was definitely caused by an overconfidence, not backed up with enough riding. Then I dislocated my shoulder. And then the one that had, so I'm kind of talking about, the one that knocked my confidence in the last couple of years was, we were at a place down in the Borders. Our friends had just finished packing in this new, pretty big jump. And we weren't only sort of considering thinking about it, about hitting it. There was 2 jumps before it that I was riding, hadn't really been riding too much, and the confidence was kind of low on the bike, which was actually, that was what was making me not ride the jumps so well before it. But this lip gets finished. We're all kind of looking at it. No one's really thinking you're going to hit it. We take some run-ins, and I just decide I'm just going to not press the brakes. Just go off this thing and see what happens. So I do it the first time, get a real buzz off it, but I case it with my front wheel. And then you tell me, you're like, yeah, you pressed the brakes on the way in there for sure. So I just went up. I wasn't even scared. I went up again to do it. Cruise in, and weirdly, I started riding those 2 jumps better, just with the knowledge that I was going to do this much bigger, scarier jump at the end. So yeah, come in, and then I just hugely case this really large jump and have this kind of horrible crash onto my head and neck. That, for some reason, that crash just made me think, like, that was a really stupid thing, that I just did. And it's since then I've had to weigh, I've had this kind of battle of thinking, okay, so before it was like, don't let anything scare you. Don't think about things, just do things, just be reckless. And then to, having that crash and having that period of not riding, having to think like, okay, actually, no, sometimes I do need to think about things. You do need to think about what can go wrong. And, I don't want to hurt myself doing something stupid like that. But then it went on to be, I was riding. So I let a little bit of fear come in, because it can kind of is important. You have to work with fear when you're making a decision to do something that's scary or not. You do have to consider your body's natural reaction to that thing that you're wanting to do. But for me, what happened is, it comes in a little bit, and then it can spread, so you think, okay, like, I'm not just the person that does the scary thing anymore. So maybe I'm not the person that does scary things in general. And then you're thinking, maybe I'm not the person that needs to go too fast in these trails. Maybe, there's loads of things that can go wrong. I started riding trails, and for the first time, certainly since I was younger, looking at just all the ways that I could hurt myself down on a mountain bike trail. And mountain biking is a dangerous sport. And what that meant was I was just riding quite stiffly. I was not enjoying it really much at all. You even start having thoughts like, is it even worth going for a ride? Would I risk, is this ride worth a serious injury? And that was the fear for me, was not so much broken bones, but it was something really serious, like something that was life-changing injury. And these things do happen in our sport. They're not very regular. They don't happen too regularly, but they do happen. They tend to be more freak kind of and very unfortunate accidents that don't necessarily happen on the biggest features. They can happen kind of anywhere, even just cycling, road cycling, wherever has these kinds of accidents. But that thought, once you get to the point where you're considering not actually going for a ride, or you're really not enjoying the rides because you're thinking, is this one ride, is this one thing worth a serious injury? And the answer is probably always, well, no. If someone told you, if you go for this ride, you're going to have a serious injury, you're going to say no, but that's not really how things work. So it gets to the point there where it's like, well, is this a sport that I want to do, and do I get enough out of this sport to justify the risk of it? And that was kind of where I was But I was still going riding because it's what we do. It's where I see my friends, and it's just a kind of default agenda for me at the weekends is to go riding. And when I go and I'm not thinking too much about the risk of it, it's the most amazing thing in the world. You're there with your friends. You're just doing something that is so much fun, and you're in such a flow state, as you said. But that soon dissipates when you're thinking too much about what can go wrong. So a part of the sort of recovery for me was a race that we did last June. Had a couple of rides before then that were probably some of my worst, just in terms of riding terribly, worrying about the risk. And then the more terribly you're riding, you're thinking, I mean, I'm not even enjoying it that much, so why would I go for a ride? And then we did this race, and I wasn't too nervous off the actual race, but I was like, okay, I'm just, it's just there in the back of your mind, like what's to happen at this race. But the race was quite therapeutic for that sense of fear, because as soon as you hear those beeps, it just kind of forces you into the state of flow, essentially. And I wasn't too worried about, I didn't ride to that well. Like the lack of confidence had actually affected my riding, but I wasn't actually thinking too much about crashing in that race. Did some more races, and it kind of, I started to get that confidence back. And that's kind of my journey with that, was getting a lot of confidence, and then at times being overly confident, but kind of getting away with things, losing it as being a little bit older, whatever. But then getting it back, kind of partly through racing. And what that gave me was just a love again. Like I refound my love of the sport. The sport is not the same when you're too fearful of what can go wrong. And the benefits are huge,
I think you got that, Morgan. I think it's just so, it's actually just kind of funny listening to you talk through your process, because like I feel like I got to that process like so many years ago. And I think, well, amongst our friend group, there's a sort of a joke that Morgan can't learn anything without his own first-hand experience. But what actually it made me think about was how much I've just like internalized that process, just because it's been going on for years. So for those that don't know, I was 16 when I first dislocated my shoulder, and like basically it took about 5 operations to get back to how it is today, and it's still beyond perfect. And pretty much like I quite a long time ago made a conscious decision that I will ride slower if it means I can ride till I'm 70 or however long I'm going to ride until, because it's just not worth I would rather just not hit that gap than not be able to ride. And for me, that's like something this like weird, I guess it's a bit of a battle I've had to have, but what it's actually taught me is like how to make the right decisions to actually progress your riding. It's just like, is this worth it today? Or shall I try this difficult feature today because I'm tired or whatever? If you don't have the intention to actually do it and the commitment to do it that day, then it's as we've sort of discussed, it's more likelihood of resulting in an accident, in an injury. And there's times when you just, certainly with the sort of racing career path that I've taken, which I know is not applicable to everyone, but you just like have to hit a feature. There's kind of like no choice in the matter, or you might as well not be at the race. And those are scary, but what I've personally learned to do is to trust in my ability, and that trust is so important in getting me through things that scare me, because I basically have a trust in my skill that I'm going to get over this feature or through this feature or down this chute, and it'll be fine. And And if I don't get down it, then like it's unlikely I would have ever got down it, you know?
I think
I
that is
guess
exactly the thing.
well, I was just gonna say, and I
Go on.
accept the level of like risk that comes with that. Um,
Mm.
and like obviously with the way my shoulder is just now, I would rather just like the way I look at it is that I just don't want to make any stupid decisions and look back on the crash and be like, like that was stupid. So if you take, for example, the sort of big crash I had at the World Enduro Series in Elysium this year, like I just don't see how you could put me at the top of that run and I wouldn't have that crash because I just didn't see it coming. Rather than like, I mean, sure, if I'd gone slower, like it probably wouldn't have happened, but it wasn't. At no point did I feel it was like stupid, and I still don't feel it was stupid. I just feel
No,
like
that's just part
it
of
was
the
something out
sport.
with
It's
my
something
control.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's an element of that. I'll say another thing just on this sort of value of confidence. Um, for me personally, is I had a day with jumps are something that I've become quite really lacking confidence for, and it's easy, especially in Scotland. You just kind of we don't really ride jumps very much, so it's quite easy that you can develop confidence everywhere else, but just not ride jumps and not deal with the fear of that. But it's still something that kind of plays on my mind even when we're riding generally. So Lacken asked if I wanted to come to this place in Fife that's filled with jumps. Him and Ryan Mid, who's an absolute king of jumping on a mountain bike. And I was like, oh man, it's that same conversation. Like, is this really worth it? Do I want to go and just like do these things, that push myself and risk injury? And then I was just decided, yeah, okay, this is something I gotta just confront, and went. And it was just one of the best days riding I'd had this year or last year, certainly. It was such a good feeling to get back from a day and just think, yeah, it's the same as, and this is true of life in general, job interviews or starting anything, starting Contour had, its scary parts, podcasts, whatever. Just that feeling of getting back and thinking I confronted that and it was successful, or even sometimes when it's not successful, you can still have a good feeling of just having confronted something that was scary. And that day was very different sort of mentality than I might have taken a few years ago, which was just slowly working up. We started in some small jumps, kind of got used to those, felt more comfortable, and then moved to a bigger jump. And then ended up at the end of the day riding this jump that at the start I would have looked at it steep jumps. So that's what I'd never really ride, and that's where I lack most confidence because I just don't know how to. I actually do more now, know how to ride them, but I just didn't. They didn't make sense to me at all. So I looked at this huge steep dirt jump at the start of the day, and I was like, no way am I doing that. But by the end of the day, I had enough confidence, as you say, in my riding ability and my progression on that day to think, yeah, okay, if I did that. The last one I just did was kind of similar. I think I can do this one. I did it quite terribly, but I made it to the landing, I think. I think the first time I did it, I didn't. I just sort of fell back. And then I did it again, and it was definitely no points for style, but I did something that at the start of the day I wasn't dreaming of. And I really felt I was just really just great. Not just that evening, but also just the next day. Like that is the power of a dangerous sport like mountain biking. It does give you some feeling that is really good. It's hard to kind of describe.
Yeah, that feeling when you like do a jump or hit a line or whatever, like you just that thing you didn't think you couldn't do is like it's pretty addictive, and I think that's what keeps a lot of people in the sport. And especially it's like skiing or rock climbing, like that's what keeps people in it, is that like constant progression. I think I wanted, if we can, go back to the jumps thing a bit, because the jumps is definitely something that you hear a lot of people talking about and a lot of people struggle with, is the mental fear over jumps and drops. And I think a lot of that comes from the sort of like when you're airborne, it's like hard to change your trajectory. And also like if it's a double, as in like the jump is a gap jump. It's a bit of a do or die sort of moment of like, am I going to get over this? There's no, like, the safety is taken away. Whereas like if you're hitting some scary rock garden, I guess you could hit it slower or faster. And there's sort of like infinite options in between to get
It's
through
that
it.
gradual progression.
Yeah. And I think with jumps also as well, certainly in the UK, because they are so few and far between, it's like hard to even get the skills practice that you need. And I suppose my advice would be for anyone that is wanting to improve their jumping is to go somewhere where there is jumps within their ability and to just ride them a lot, just to get that repetition that you can't get anywhere else. Because I mean, if you think about our jumping ability, it's actually like pretty strong in the grand scheme of things in Scotland, and we had a lot of jumps on tap when we were younger. Whereas if you look at riders from other parts of Scotland, their jumping ability is quite often a lot less because they just don't have them at all. And then if you compare ours to like the scene down in England and Wales, where there's vast amounts more jumps, it's like I almost feel like a complete beginner again. If I go to one of the Welsh bike parks or something, I'm just like, whoa, this is out of my league again. And I would consider myself someone who's completely competent at jumping, and I almost have to start again with the jumping skill. It certainly feels like that. So I almost want to, I suppose I'm promoting the message that like jumps are almost always scary, no matter how good you are. They just get bigger and they get scarier. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
you know, like whilst you may look at someone cruise through a set of jumps, if they're their local jumps, like it's a totally different feeling compared to if they went somewhere new as well, because you have to learn the line, learn the rhythm. It doesn't just come as easy as it looks always. And I think that's something worth bearing in mind whilst you're going through the process, is that it is a process.
Exactly, yeah. And you should try and be as gradual as you can with all of this stuff. It is easier on trails because generally there will be one or two features that are sort of cruxes and are, your fear will be focused on those certain places within a trail. But it's quite easy to just sort of gradually get faster or gradually go to slightly more and more difficult trails. With jumps, it is, as you say, and gaps. So usually for me, certainly fear would be focused on jumps and gaps in races and just generally. Because you're having to, it's an unknown. You can't, you either do it or you don't. And obviously they're quite high stakes. I think what I've learned is just, that day where I had like my confidence really knocked, the lesson for me there, and it's kind of an ongoing battle, especially as I get older, because I did have this attitude when I was younger that I developed from competing that was just don't even think about fear, which is a very useful attitude, and it was really important. That's one of the things you have to develop, not just in mountain biking but in all sports. But the thing about a dangerous sport like mountain biking, action sports, is you've not just got the fear of performance, you've also got the fear that you might hurt yourself. And that's the battle, I think, when most people start racing or competing in these kinds of sports, is the first thing you need to get over is just the fear of hurting yourself. And then you absolutely get rid of that to the point where you're not even thinking about it. And then you've just got the nerves of performance. But it is now the case. I mean, I'm racing kind of less, but I'm trying to get back to that place, but be a little bit more considerate about it, a little bit more. I want to be confident, but a little bit more mature and thoughtful in how I'm getting my confidence. And jumps are still the thing for me. We're going to Duffy Bike Park in Wales in like a month or two, and I was a little bit, hesitant of whether to even go on that trip, because I know we're going to go and it's, we're going to hit some big jumps. But I want to do it. It's something I want to deal with, because it's it just makes me more confident just generally about my writing, but then also you just kind of feel good about yourself generally if you're doing something you know you're capable of, but is scary. And the tactic for me now is like it was that day with Lachlan Blair and Ryan Middleton in Fife, is just to progress. Don't, especially when you're not confident in your writing. And this was a big thing for me that I took for granted. I had those couple of years not writing, and I had 5 years injury free beforehand. And the 5 years injury free beforehand, I would just do things that were scary just for the sake of it. And I thought I could do that again when I came back, but I didn't realize that I had earned the right kind of to push things because I was writing all the time, and I was very confident, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, in my abilities to actually do it. When I came back, I thought I could get the same buzz from, being the first to hit a gap or whatever, but I actually didn't have the right to do that. I wasn't writing that well. I hadn't been writing enough, and you just can't jump. Don't, progress slowly. Don't just jump to something. That was the lesson for me, certainly. I had to be writing more. Like this is the attitude I have now, which is, if I'm writing enough, then I feel, okay, yeah, this is something kind of scary, but I'm going to do it because I have that confidence in my abilities. So at Duffy in a couple of months, I think the thing will be, slowly starting a track with, and this is, you say, this is probably very obvious to most people, but took a sort of relearning for me when I came back to the sport, was just, yeah, you have to have a good faith in how well you're riding, and just relate that to how big this feature is you're wanting to hit or whatever.
Definitely. I don't know what else I have to add to that. I think that kind of covered a lot of the points there.
So in terms of lessons, what have we got to say in terms of confidence? I think it's something that just has this profoundly positive, feeling confident on the bike and generally has a profoundly positive influence on your experience of the sport. Going riding and not thinking too much about hurting yourself is a very different experience to going and just worrying the whole time about what could go wrong. And you can do that, in life generally. There's a huge amount of things to be fearful of at all times. And it's, to some extent, we just have to kind of accept that and get on with things anyway. So that's, one thing. And then the second thing, I think, is it is good to push things, and you will ride better and feel more confident. You don't just have it, it's confidence is something generally that you have to kind of work on and maintain. But do it gradually and thoughtfully. So push yourself, but ensure that it's not too big a step. And, just ask yourself, have I been riding enough? Am I feeling confident today? Am I ready for this? Am I ready to take this slight, bigger step forward and hit this feature or hit this jump? And go.
I was just going to say, the way I always say that to myself is, is this a battle I want to fight today? I was thinking about picking my battles, and do I want to do this one today? And that's something that you have to bear in mind. I mean, because it's just, if it's a wet day or it's just not the right conditions, it can just be you're just making the job harder for yourself. So you really want to be confident in that, that you're confident that you want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Have that faith. It's all relative. There's the Brandon Semnuk and the Braj Vestovics that are just doing crazy things at Red Bull Rampage, and then there's kind of someone that's maybe only been riding for a couple of years looking to hit a tabletop at their local trail center. And really the experience of those two things are very similar. And whether you should do it or not depends on the same things. I really think I can do this? And then if the answer is yes, stop. thinking about it too much, because you do, when you come into something like that, you want to just have made your decision and accept then that it could still go wrong. But go through that little checklist before you hit it. And if you do that quite regularly, your experience of mountain biking will be infinitely better.
Definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, you're just hitting on a lot of great points, Morgan. You're not leaving me with a lot to say, to be honest.
It's funny because we did this podcast before. We did quite a good job before. I'm trying to touch on all the same points. I mean, anything from your own. I mean, that is basically it. I don't know if there's a huge amount else to say on confidence.
Yeah, on like certainly a very high level, like covered the sort of the main things that like relate to mountain biking in terms of like skill acquisition or hitting features. I suppose there's a whole other level of confidence in terms of racing or whatever, but that's probably a completely different podcast in itself.
I mean, you can share
maybe something that we're not even that qualified to talk about.
No, probably not. But I mean, you had your own struggles. You used to talk about shoulder fear, which me and Mackie always used to laugh about, because it was. I mean, obviously, the fear was caused. The cause of the fear was your shoulder, but fear is just fear. It was just a general fear of what could go wrong, even while we're riding. And you kind of obviously came through that. And I think in that way that you described, you came through it quite gradually. To the point where you are now. It was super
gradual. I mean, I just had to suppress it, basically, and I still do suppress it. Like if I thought about it and it bothered me, then it just I wouldn't be able to ride my mountain bike. And we're at a point now with it where like literally it sounds like if I dislocated it again, then like that would basically be the end of me riding mountain bikes, and people would be like, well, you hardly ever dislocate your shoulder. But I mean, like mine came out like in excess of 50 times over the 5-year period, probably. It was so bad, like when I sneezed it came out, so it was pretty bad. But I did literally just put it to the back of my mind, because I knew that if I didn't think about it, I would be sort of safer in that regard. I mean, we're just coming back to revisiting that point, but it's when you back off but due to lack of confidence, that your body position on the bike changes and you like lose grip, and you just can't, you're just not riding in a safe way anymore. And sure, I'll have my crashes when I'm fully confident, but it's those ones when you backed off that those are the ones I'll regret if I hurt myself. So I'm not saying I necessarily dealt with it in the most healthy way, that's for sure, but it kind of worked. But I mean, I've had quite an interesting version of fear compared to other people. I remember being on a ride once, and I just kept talking about how scary it was. I mean, I talk about how scary it is all the time, and how dangerous features are. I pretty much only think about the scary things. And I don't know, it's like by saying them out loud, I'm just normalizing them rather than like holding it inside, which I suppose is quite healthy.
It's a kind of coping mechanism. Well, I think the reality is everyone's thinking about, like, one of the, it was interesting, but like there's something about racing that you have to, there's all kinds of different things you think a lot about when you're trying to get better at racing. And like one of the things we used to do was, because I used to see a sports psychologist, and I can't remember if it came from that or not, but one of the things was like, we had this thing at races that we wouldn't say anything negative about the race or the track or whatever. I just remember us practicing that. So even on the weekends that we, lots of things were going wrong or whatever, the track, we weren't that into the track, we wouldn't say anything until after the race. But I'm not sure it makes that much of a difference, because you're still having the thoughts. Obviously, you don't want to encourage some, pessimistic, fearful conversations that just ruin your ride or your race or whatever. But there is a certain value in just acknowledging that, yeah, this is scary, this isn't that great, but
It's funny that I'm assuming it was the sports academy coach that said that, like, to not say those thoughts out loud. But like, I love a good moan about a track, and whether a section is scary, dangerous, tiring, or whatever. And to be fair, if it was like not at a race, it wouldn't fill me with motivation necessarily to do that section. But at a race, almost it seems to be the tracks I moan the most about, I do the best on. It's almost more, I see it as like I've got a job to do and I just need to grit through it, which is not hugely related to
sick joy and doing well on the tracks you moan the most about.
Not really. I don't even do that. I just moan about it because I'm not enjoying it as much, but I just crack on anyway. But I suppose that's not really confidence in any way.
It's kind of related to it though, because it's that same thing.
Similar,
you have to acknowledge that yes, something can go wrong. I remember in Mont Saint Anne one year I qualified really well in the junior category, top 5, which was like, those were the kind of results I was dreaming of, and that's where I wanted to be. And I was like, it was just quite profound, that feeling of like, what? I can't remember if it was 4th or 5th, but after qualifying, I was like, wow. And I'd had this very normal feeling run. And there's a cross-country World Cup on, and the downhill was on the Sunday, so we only had an hour, so we didn't go straight from the qualifying to the race the next day. So this next day where I kind of let the result was it was hard to ignore. It was hard not to feel like I had something to lose as opposed to everything to gain. And so it ended up being the case that I went up and I did exactly the same time as I did in my qualifying to the second on a dry course, and everyone was going around 15, 20 seconds faster. So it was one of the most just disappointing results I had in my whole sort of career of racing mountain bikes. And it was caused by that same thing of just, I wasn't willing to accept. So it's this balance between, you do have to accept in order to feel confident that something might go wrong. So I wasn't willing to accept that my result would be any different than it was in qualifying. I wanted it to be exactly the same. And that's exactly what I did. I tried to maintain what I had, and I did exactly the same time as I did in qualifying. And actually, the thing was that I should have had is just accepted, like, it might not be the same. I've got to go out and fight for this as hard as I can. It's something to be seized, not something to hold. And that's true of performance and just general confidence. They're very, very similar. You have to accept in order to do a thing. Because if you hold on too tightly to nothing going wrong, then the right thing to do is just to sit in your house and not really do anything, because things could go wrong all over the place. But you just got to accept that risk and get on with riding and life generally, because it's kind of worse. What is gained from riding and not thinking too much, not letting fear control your life, is so much better than what is gained from not taking any risks or chances, doing anything.
Yeah, it just frees up your mind. You can just stop worrying about that and just be like, yep, that's what's going to happen if that happens, and I accept that. But I mean, it's a big part of it is being honest with yourself, I guess. At the end of the day, you don't want to just say that and then you actually, you're feeling the consequences of that risk that you took and think, actually, I didn't want this. You have to be quite understanding of yourself first to do that.
I think that's the thing, yeah. And that's been the change in me, was transitioning from being a rider that was just wanting to take every risk available to being a little bit older and seeing now that, like, being a little bit more choosy. There's huge value in taking risks in this sport, and there's huge value in this sport, certainly for me personally. But now I don't necessarily just, like when we were in Bike Park Wales, I followed Ron Sorrell down this track that they have that was just so much gnarlier than we thought it would be. And he'd mentioned that there'd be this gap halfway down the track. And so we came up around this blind corner, and then he just pops off this lip. And I just follow him. And it was just way gnarlier than, it wasn't like it was that big, but the consequences of not making it were pretty huge. It was a very steep knuckle up a landing into this chute and right-hand turn. So if you clipped the landing, you would have gone over the bars down this steep hill into this, big berm at the bottom head first. And I did it fine, followed him. And I was kind of like, I was kind of like giggling and just like in a bit of shock. You and Hutch didn't do it behind me. And when I got down, I would have just been like, that was exactly what I lived for. It was just those reckless thrills. And now it's that, should I actually have done that? Was that worth the risk? Like, even though I got away with it, was that actually a good decision? And that's been my own sort of development when it comes to getting and maintaining confidence on the mountain bike. And that, I think, unless you've got anything more to add.
No, I think it's been a fun discussion about confidence for the second time. A little bit more succinct than the first time, probably.
What do you think?
I think so. Yeah. I'm not saying it was better or worse. I'm just saying just a little bit more succinct, a little bit more, definitely a little bit more concise. Those the rehearsal certainly trimmed it a little bit, but I think I think we covered a lot of
we got to the same place.
Points. We're at the same place.
I mean, these are, it's really important. I hope this is useful if you're listening. These generally, the format of these podcasts might change a little bit. We'll kind of learn as we go. But yeah, thanks you so much for listening to this point. Confidence-wise, be careful. Make sure you trust in yourself, you trust in your riding, take gradual steps, and the sport will, give you so much back in return.
Very wise. I like that, actually. That's quite nice. I sounded like I was being a little bit taking the piss there. Actually, I do quite like that. That's nice, Morgan. Save the best till last.
Thanks, Christo. And thank you so much to everyone still listening. We will be back possibly next week. Possibly we're either going to do these once every 2 weeks. I might actually do an intro because I didn't say any of this at the start. But I'll either do once a week or once every 2 weeks. And plenty more topics, plenty more guests. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Christo, for joining. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much.